good day, wherever you are. I know everybody's in a different time zone. Thank you for joining us for another wonderful session and conversations around the 24th Encounters Documentary Film Festival. My name is SOKO. I am currently in Lamu, Kenya, and today I think we're gonna have really cool conversations around editing across borders, because with the wonderful, amazing films by Rumbi Katedza and Francois Verster. So, and Simon Wood. Is Simon around? Hey, Simon. And Simon Wood. So I think we'll just do a quick round of introductions, just going through the Zoom panel to see who's what. I think I'm gonna start with, let's start with Francois. Yes, introduce yourself, Francois.
Okay, so my name is Francois Verster. I am one of the two directors and producers on Gold Taken, a feature documentary that had its world premiere at the Encounters Film Festival this past Saturday.
Yeah, and congratulations on the premiere.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Simon, you want to go next?
Hi, I'm Simon Wood. I co-directed Girl Taken with Francois. Crazy few years of making something across different countries, and luckily we end up working with Bob, who is also on this panel today, who was a wonderful editor to work with. So I think he should go next.
Very kind introduction, Simon. I'm Bob Caldwell. I'm based in Ireland, and as Simon said, editing in various countries. They ended up with me finishing the cut in Ireland, in my studio in Wicklow, and it had already been through a couple of editors before, so it was a privilege to be asked to finish this film, because it is an extraordinary story, and one that was quite complex, I think, to tell from the outset, and certainly a lot of fun to work on. So that's me.
Yeah, no, it is a super intriguing story, and I don't know, are we allowed to have spoilers and talk about spoilers for the people who haven't watched it? But it's a super amazing story. We're gonna get deeper into what the journey was like for you guys. I think Rumbi, you can go next.
Thanks, Sam. So hi, I'm Rumbi Katedza. I'm a Harare-based filmmaker. I'm the director of Transactions, which also had its world premiere here at Encounters, so currently at Cape Town. And it tackles themes to do with migration and remittances.
Yeah, and I think I know of your film pretty well. We were there at the beginning when it was an idea, and
yeah, you were there right at the beginning. Yeah,
exactly. So it's so amazing that the world is gonna get to see it. Ronet, am I saying your name correct?
Yes, you've got it right. It's Ronet.
Yeah. You want to go next?
Yes, I am based in Franschhoek, South Africa, which is just an hour outside of Cape Town, where we have all the wine, make all our lovely wine. And I was the editor for Transactions.
Yes, amazing having all you people here. So we'll kind of just first, congratulations to both of you for having your world premiere. And I think the first question first, I think you guys had to work and edit a film beyond just the sheer experience of making the film in normal times. You had to do it during COVID. So first, I think we'll just start with, how did you make this happen to get to this point? And kind of what are the kind of things that just you had to deal with from not only a production standpoint, but just getting it to the edit? I think we could start there. Who wants to take this for the Transactions team?
Well, I can start, and Ronet can then carry on when we get to post. So it was a very long process. It started off a story that was supposed to be based in Cape Town, with a character in Cape Town. And when I came to visit him at the beginning of 2020, I realized that so many stories that were coming from him had to do with his family and the importance of family in his life. And then COVID hit, And I got on the last plane out of South Africa to spend lockdown with my family. And we restarted production again at the end of 2020. And after having conversations with my producers, we agreed that the film needed to be shot wherever the family was. And so we shot in Harare, where I was. And then I also filmed with his mother in Bulawayo in Zimbabwe, the second city. I filmed here in Cape Town with Frank. I filmed, I had a filmmaker from Reunion Island shooting on our behalf in London and in Luton, in the UK. And we shot with the family for almost a year, and that culminated in the post process. And it was a hectic time. A lot of editors were working at the time. A lot of films seemed to be busy, and we searched high and low, and we were really lucky to connect with Ronet through the Editors Guild here. And then we started this grueling process. We only had 6 weeks to reach this broadcast deadline and go through all of this footage to then get to the stage of being able to edit. And Ronet was in Francois, obviously, and I was in Harare. And we had to come up with a process that worked to methodically get through the 6 weeks. And Ronet can talk more to that. But it did start with a paper edit, and then we took it through a structural discussion. Ronet, you want to speak a bit about that?
Yeah. So it was actually, I just want to quickly speak about how kind of it started. I had a lot of, during COVID, things canceling and things popping up, so it was a little bit chaotic. And I just had a cancellation, and I remember it was a Friday afternoon. And I saw through Sage an email coming through, and I'm like, oh, that sounds interesting. So I just sent my CV through, and by the next Thursday, I picked up the drives from the airport. So it all happened super quickly. 6 days edit weekdays, and I think it turned out to be even 7. I don't think there was much time for anything. And one of the things, and I don't quite understand the story before, and it's probably better that I don't, but there was an edit, there was a process. So there was a kind of timeline made up to a paper edit, but the story changed so much, Rumbi. So there was a lot of new sequences that came in, things that was maybe a little bit misunderstood by the previous group, because I think they just assembled and just pulled in footage and threw it on a timeline. So the first thing we did, and interestingly, I was going to go to Zimbabwe, to Harare, in that first week still. And I told Rumbi earlier, if it did happen, we would have never finished this film in time, I think, just because it was so, every hour, every moment we had to go into, get the edit out. But starting with the paper edit, what we did is kind of break down the timeline as it was, somebody else assembled, and isolate all the characters that I threw on Frame.io. So, focus on Mamlilo and throw all her sequences in, all 5 characters. And now I'm going very fast. What we did then with your eye. So Rumbi kept her eye as it was coming through. She kept kind of, looking at the sequences coming together. And once we had that together, more or less all the key sequences of the characters, we put together, I think it was Jamboard, Rumbi. We played on Jamboard one morning, where we kind of did our virtual board that you would usually do in an edit room, put up all your boards and your sequences, and we got a structure together and basically kind of, put it together from that point on. And I think Frame.io, Google Drive, Jamboard, Sync Play, all made kind of working together so much easier. We made the best use of our time. Rumbi was always viewing something on Frame.io while I was doing changes. So that was absolutely amazing. But yeah, that's the basic.
No, I can imagine. It's not only having to deal with internet and the fair basic level, but then there's just the whole idea of putting everything together based on the timelines that you had. And I think we'll come back to timelines and everything. And Francois, as a Girl Taken, as in something I did not know, is a pretty famous story in the sense in South Africa. And so what was the journey like, just getting to the edit beyond and having to, like, when did you start editing, and like how did that kind of set the journey in getting, I don't like, I think Bob kind of touched it, like you went through more than one editor. So how was that like?
I think maybe Simon and I can answer this question together, so maybe we can take turns. But basically, the project, like seems to always end up being the case with the films, at least that I make, took a very long time to get off the ground. I mean, we approached the family in early 2016, and I think neither Simon or I had any idea that it was going to take so long to get funding. Because at the time we thought, well, this is a story that has international attention. You know, we're going to kind of, you know, find money abroad very quickly. There was already a lot of interest from other production companies to get the film made. And for various reasons, one of them being COVID, it did take a lot longer to raise funds. I mean, as it turned out, I think the film is actually a lot stronger and a lot more interesting because it took so long, if only because, you know, more things happened in the story, and I think the characters evolved personally a lot more, and the story is more interesting. I think if we had finished the film at the time, I mean, we would have probably not said much more in the film than what one could have read in newspapers or magazines at the time. So I think, you know, kind of, you know, documentary has this very complex relationship to funding, and then often not having funding makes better films. But I suppose that's another discussion. But so basically, we filmed bits and pieces. I mean, Simon invested in the film. We, you know, all of us invested in kind. Simon invested quite a bit in the film to get things going, and we filmed a first set of interviews in 2016. We also filmed various bits of, you know, observational events over the next couple of years, and then we formed a co-production partnership with Solsu Films with David Rain in Ireland. And he actually helped to raise the substance of the funding that we eventually used. So we started filming the formal interviews in the middle of 2020. It was difficult because we were, you know, at that time we couldn't really, we didn't feel it was right to enter people's homes. There was very strict regulations around filming. So we looked hard for a kind of studio setting for the interviews that would work, and came across a very interesting place in Ottery in Cape Town to film that. So basically that was the bulk of the filming. We kept on filming bits and pieces afterwards, but that was the bulk of it. And then I think it was October 2020, we moved on to our first editor, and maybe I can pass over to Simon to tell more about that.
Yeah, I think COVID is, I don't want to talk about it really, because actually I've just got my negative COVID test today after having a week with COVID. But it made such an impact on our film. It's crazy. I mean, if you think about, we weren't allowed to film in the school for longer than 3 hours where the two sisters met. We weren't allowed to film in the hospital where the child was kidnapped. I mean, it had so many creative impacts along the way. We ended up doing things that we just wouldn't normally do. Like Francois said, we booked a massive location just so we could interview people with different backdrops. But then practically, it started to have quite real impact when, you know, the cinematographer got COVID. And the big thing for us was just before we were about to start our first phase of editing, the whole transcription team got COVID and wiped out any chance we had of starting the edit in a way that Francois and I would be comfortable with. So we went into like 100 hours of material with no transcriptions, starting an edit. So that was insane. You know, like, how do you cut a film with no transcripts? And obviously put intense pressure under everyone. So there was an enormous sort of domino COVID effect through the film, which meant that the first phase of editing, we didn't really, in 16 weeks, manage to cut down to a real rough cut, which is insane if you think about it. Obviously left the producer pulling his hair out in Ireland, but you know, it was just COVID hell. So that was what happened, with these endless issues for us dominoing through the production. And then just as things were getting really crazy, we handed it off to Bob and he finished it for us.
So at which point I think Simon and Francois had enough of the COVID remote editing. So played tag team, hopped on a plane to Ireland. Simon first stayed for a couple of weeks. He went home, Francois came over, then the two of them were there, and then Simon finished it. So what did I spend? About 8 or 9 weeks with you guys. So I, at that point, had inherited a pretty, you know, long rough cut really. And Francois had done a bit of tinkering as well at home on Final Cut, I think, hadn't you, Francois? A little bit of tinkering.
Favorite program.
And then between all that, the jigs and the reels, at the end of it, I think we managed to finish it. But it was a really interesting, I mean, a collaboration with two very, I think, different directors. Francois would be a very good, brilliant, may I say, op-doc director, storyteller. Simon was more of a visual storyteller. So those two minds together, working with me, was a real experience. So from that perspective, we didn't really have any remote editing per se. There was always, we were working together the whole time. Isn't that right? Well, actually, that's not true. I did 2 weeks on my own.
Yeah. And
it's no, sorry, Professor. You can go ahead.
And just to fill in, we had actually worked with another editor in between as well, which was a remote job, and for various reasons that didn't work out, which was, you know, kind of partly why we then chose to work with Bob. But there had been a middle period that was where the long distance editing did impact on the ability to work.
No, it's really interesting to hear from both of your film, like the two films, and how I think something that Ronet said about she wanted to go to Harare and the possibility of working together with Rumbi, and then you have the deadline issue there, and then you guys did manage to go to Bob and be there as the edit is happening. So I'm wondering or whether for both films you could discuss kind of what you see was. Personally, I think it's more of like an extreme con of not being able to be together with the editor. But I'm wondering if there's something you've experienced that you saw was like something that was a pro of not working in the same space and having to figure out how to do things remotely. That's kind of like a silver lining that came out of the process, and kind of the perils of having to do the same thing. Rumbi, you want to go first?
Yeah, so obviously, first choice would be to be in the same room and working together. That would have been our preference. But I think technology was the great unifier during the entire process, because it was like Ronet was in the room the whole time. I would have my phone on video and she'd be talking to me and I'd be checking something, and then she'd be making changes on her side. So we're constantly in each other's faces and in each other's ears. And I'm not usually, you know, that au fait on technology, and Ronet would just work me through it and say, look, this is how we're going to work with this app, and this is how we're going to work through it. And it was just fun, because when our story consultant, you know, suggested the idea of Jamboard, it was like playing chess with Ronet, because, like, you know, she would move the structure and then I would move something over there, and it was all real time. So it was that, for me, was kind of exciting as well. And it also allowed me to keep my own life going on, because COVID had affected my family personally quite a bit, and I needed to be there for my kids. So I stayed in Harare, and the worry was that if Ronet came, we would lose at least 3 days in the travel and the setup and everything, getting her comfortable. And because we were working on such a tight deadline, we made that decision, and we're lucky that it worked out. And I must say, Ronet and I still haven't met in person.
Oh, no way. That's bizarre.
I'm taking Rumbi to the airport on Monday morning. We'll meet for the first time.
Oh, great.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
That's amazing.
No, that's incredible. To pull this off completely and finish and not ever
Amazing.
and it's crazy to think about it now. Like, it feels normal now in a way, in a sense, but it's I think it's important for us to remember that it's not normal, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not. Sorry.
Yeah, Bob, go ahead.
I was just going to say, since I worked with Simon and Francois on Girl Taken, I've done 2 documentaries, both entirely remotely, one for the BBC and one for Discovery Plus, which is actually a South African shark documentary. And they were both, due to thanks to technology. I mean, I haven't met each of those directors on each of those films, but I was able to dial into an edit suite in London, dial into an edit suite in Belfast, and edit these films using Frame.io, Blackbird, Trint, all these toys, all these programs that allow you to collaborate. Which is technology has moved so fast. I think thanks to thanks is the wrong word, due to COVID, that it's allowed us to do what we've been able to do, what you've been able to do on your film, without meeting each other.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious, as an additional question, Bob, do you see it as like this is the future of editing, where we don't have to meet?
It's a good question. I think again, the collaboration with Simon and Francois in the edit suite, I think it's much better having that. I think it's better to meet in person and work together to some extent. I think some remote editing is absolutely fine, but I think at the end of the day, it is a team sport, really, isn't it? Making a film. I think personally, I've thoroughly enjoyed my time with the guys in the net, and I think that's an important aspect of it. So I hope that doesn't go away, Sam, to be honest.
What do you think, Ronet?
I think it would probably go away to a large extent. I mean, so many of the films before COVID was kind of remote in any case. We'll have maybe weekly catch-ups or whatever with the director, and those viewings together to kind of, the milestone viewings are so important and connecting. But 90 or 85% was remote in any case. So it almost was a lead up to a complete 100% remote. But for me, it doesn't stop being a team sport if you're not in the same room. I think the tools are different, how you connect and how you tell the story, and maybe some of the warmth and the kind of I think what I'm trying to say is, as much as for me a massive pro is the win in time. As an editor, I can so much more focus without having directors can waste time sometimes. Rumbi, you never did. But there's a lot of just getting to an office, sitting down, those and there's an element of it giving warmth and exploring the story, and that is great. But I wouldn't mind it being like this. I would love that kind of a connection now and then. But for me, this is a lovely way to work.
Yeah.
Simon and Francois.
Well, I would say that there's a couple of, I guess, geographical or geopolitical issues to consider. And I think one of them is that, is obviously the kind of film you're making, or the nature, or the audience or market that the film is intended for. I mean, I think there's certain films that lend themselves to international co-production better than others. I mean, I don't believe there's such a thing as necessarily as a standard international form of storytelling. But I think with our form particularly, I mean, it was a film that was made, or at some level was intended for a streaming style market. And I think there are certain kind of rules of storytelling that are more easy to share internationally. And I think we were very happy to work with Bob because he understood, and obviously he understood that form of storytelling very well. I think there might be other forms, maybe more intensely personal forms, and maybe forms that have an intensely personal aesthetic. I think those kind of films, particularly because the editing process is one of exploration, is often one where you find your edit language as you go along. I think for films like that, it's probably more important that you work with somebody in the same space, or at least kind of build up a relationship of understanding and trust in the same space, and then move off. So I mean, I found with Bob, I think Bob, you'll probably agree with this, is when we came back to South Africa and we were doing a couple of final changes, I mean, it was very easy because, I mean, we understood each other, we had spent time together, and it was much easier to, I mean, when you already have some kind of relationship with somebody. I mean, this isn't, I mean, I know, Ronet, you're saying you haven't even met, so I'm amazed at that.
Yeah, no, I do agree. But it's the other thing I think the remote editing allows is you can choose your editor globally now. You don't have to pick somebody locally, and then sure collaborate at some point along the way. But the pool of editors becomes much broader for any filmmakers, I think. So that's certainly good for editors.
And there's a couple of questions that are coming in, and I'll just kind of go through them really quickly. For Rumbi, what was your selection criteria and process in choosing the different crew that you were working with in the different spaces that you were working with?
Okay, so initially in Cape Town, because we were starting the film in Cape Town, I wanted somebody who was Cape Town based, and I spoke to a number of filmmakers that I knew here to try and get recommendations. And it was through a conversation with Magantri Pillai, where she introduced me to a cinematographer that she'd been working with, who happened to be from Zimbabwe and based in Cape Town. So we met and we started discussing the film, and we went through this back and forth before I came to Cape Town for almost a year before we committed to working together. So by which time we had a really good connection and an understanding of the story together. So that was great. And he brought in the sound person who worked with us. So it was organic. And in Zimbabwe, I worked with the crew that I'm normally used to. So it was the sound people who we would use, different sound people in different countries. And Ngoni, who's based here, would come home to Zim to shoot in Zim for us. In the UK, it was also an organic thing through people I knew. So I had a number of filmmakers who I'd worked with in the past who are based in the UK, who I spoke to about my dilemma about not being able to travel to the UK. And they connected me with a number of cinematographers based on the criteria that I had given them. I wanted somebody who had some kind of basic understanding of issues of migration, remittances, somebody who I could connect with on a personal level. And I eventually, through a very close friend of mine who works at the Beeb, met Rafiq Apogee, who is a cinematographer and a sound engineer. And we had several conversations because I just wanted to make sure he understood the subject matter, and he was sensitive to the issues that the family was going through as well. Because it is a film that looks into finances and remittances, and people are very private about that, and he had to be very sensitive about how he was going into this family. And I believed that he understood that, and I ended up working with him, and he brought in his PA to work with him to keep it quite intimate. So we were always shooting 2 people, or at the most 3 people in the room, if there was a lot more to do, but we usually kept it very small, and we were constantly in touch on devices again.
And I think there's something interesting that you've spoken about sensitivity, and I think in line with just conversations on sensitivity and the kind of stories that filmmakers tell, particularly in documentary. I think we work very hard to hide the information in just as we deal with drives, but in this case, we had to work with with the internet and with all the footage that we work. So how did, in your case, was it in both of your films, was it something that you had to take into consideration in terms of like, you know, the data security and the kind of how you were dealing with the material and how you were engaging with the material? How did just the thinking of that affect how you were working? And if it did, what parameters did you have in play or in place to ensure that you were comfortable in pulling through your edits? Who wants to take that? Simon?
I don't think we had anything in place, Francois, to do with security, did we? We just threatened Bob a lot, you know, so he was scared of us. And then, you know, that was fine.
Rumbi?
Bob, did we have any security issues?
They paid me a lot of money to be nice to them, and now it's all coming out. Any security issues? No.
Ruby?
You know, we just put a lot of faith into the dreaded couriers, the DHL and the FedExes of the world, and just hope that things would arrive on time, you know, because like I said, like Ronet was saying earlier, we were interviewing editors for a week, and then, you know, within a week of my interview with Ronet and a couple of conversations, we had put the drives, the initial editor who had started the film put the drives on a plane, and she picked them up at the airport. And when we were working in the UK, so Rafiq would shoot, and he would put a first set of drives and courier them to the editor and hold on to a second set of drives. And then he would upload proxies to me. So
wow.
I had to follow, I was making sure I could see the footage here, but the footage was in South Africa, the actual footage. And then once it was secure in South Africa, and we knew that everything had been backed up to the cloud, then Rafiq would send the rest of the footage. So yeah, it was.
So I think you had 3 backups, two or three backups of everything before it came. Yeah. Rumbi, I never told you that the day that I went to pick up the drives, my car stopped working on the way back from the airport, and I was stuck for 7 hours.
Oh my God.
I thought I'd tell it to you.
No.
Yeah,
but there was a couple of times where we were waiting, or I was missing footage or whatever. There was a stage where we were like, you know, I was waiting for the courier to come to get those things to me. But in terms of safety, I think they had it well backed up on two backups on their side, so I wasn't worried.
I was gonna say, Bob, do you have any confessions?
Wow. No, I don't have any confessions. No. I know that, you know, regarding the media, Simon had a wallop of it back in his place in Cape Town, and also there was another backup in Ireland, and then I had my edit drive, which was all the proxies. So it was definitely backed up in a couple of places. Is that right, Simon? Would I be right in that, in saying that?
Yeah, we've got 30 terabytes of footage on this production. So you're not uploading that to the cloud. That's staying on drives. Yeah, and I've got them right next to me right now. So, but if it appears on Pirate Bay, we know it's you, Bob. Okay?
Yeah. I've got a button here. You've got to be still be nice to me. I'll press that button at any point. So the upload button.
It's crazy that you guys have been throwing around a couple of the really nifty, nice toy tools that you've been working with, and we have a question that's like, you've mentioned various technologies. Working remotely, Frame.io, Blackbird, like, could you run them through briefly and just kind of speak to what they did for you and how helpful they are to their work? And is it something you're going to carry forward in the work in your next projects or the projects you're working with right now? I think we'll start with Bob, then we take it down.
Well, I will start by saying, again, I didn't use that technology with Simon and Francois because they were with me in the edit suite. So we didn't use those technologies. I have used them since on other projects, and the way that that's been working for me. And Frame.io is something that I would be using. I'd do a cut, and then at the end of a couple of days, I'd send it off to the producer and the director, and they'd give notes. And I mean, that's a really good way, I find, of remote working, where you don't have somebody constantly sitting beside you on a phone or on a computer. It gives you the freedom to edit, and then it allows you to get feedback and work on the feedback. Trent and Blackbird, they tend to be kind of, the director was using Trent and Blackbird with all of the transcripts and things like that, which is a really clever technology, because Blackbird, certainly with Trent and Blackbird, they get the media, essentially they get the sequences, and then you can plug it straight into Avid. The sequences import directly into Avid as AIFs. So whatever they've been looking at, I can immediately see and have the corresponding time codes, and it's a very fast way of working. So that's my experience of those technologies anyway, from a remote perspective.
I still don't understand what you're talking about. What do you mean you looked at something that they looked at? What's Trent and Blackbird?
Trent
you need to be, how does it work exactly?
Well, I haven't been using it. See, the directors were using Trent and Blackbird. I'm not even sure how it works. They were given proxies and transcripts that all linked together, and then the clips that they essentially do a little mini edit, and that AAF would come back into be imported into the Avid. So I'd have that sequence that they've trimmed back. It's a very basic edit tool.
Okay.
I think Trent is an audio transcription tool, right?
Trent is a transcription tool that talks to Blackbird. Blackbird is a basic, edit tool, and then you can, as I say, you can create AAFs and bring them into Avid from Blackbird. That's all.
Yeah, because I think I've worked on an edit where I think it's kind of like a big reason why people still love using Avid. It's how you could bring in the transcriptions into the edit, and you kind of can search for the stuff that you want to use through the transcripts, and it will take you right to where it is on the edit.
Yeah, if it's set up right, it's very clever.
Exactly. But I personally don't like Avid, so story for another day.
Well, I use Premiere Pro on Girl Taken. I had to learn how to use Premiere Pro pretty quickly, didn't I, Simon?
I was like, Ronet and Rumbi were speaking about some softwares you're using, right?
Yeah, Rumbi, do you want to go?
You were the techie, but yeah, the one I was really into the stuff that was helping us put the structure together. So I mean, we decided on a process that, because I really loved working all things Google Drive, and especially Jamboard. But then you recommended all of the editing tools.
Yeah, I think the Frame.io is the big one. I don't know Blackbird. It sounds amazing. But using Premiere, I don't think it's there. But Frame.io is amazing, and what I would do is at the end of it was so quick. Our days were filled with so much change that at the end of the day, I upload a cut to Rumbi. Usually before she wakes up or when she goes on a school run, I would actually make my notes of things that I would want to do just to connect with Rumbi. And when you kind of sit, you add your notes. And by that time, kind of I'm, in the edit. So it literally kind of jots down the time code and where the note is, and you can draw on it. And you can do so many amazing things with Frame.io. The one thing I did miss, and I don't know if they're doing it, but we were able to do it with sync play at the end, where we can both look at a file at the same time. So we would be viewing our final cut, you and Harari and me and Francois at the same time. So we would be speaking through it on WhatsApp. That was very handy, and something I don't think Frame.io does is kind of a network gang view, because that would be amazing. I think that's the big tools. And of course, Google Drive was amazing. And just uploading the transcripts and you highlighting the transcripts and throwing it into folders when you've reviewed it and what bits you liked. So I think it's maybe a more manual version of what I think Blackbird seems to be.
Google Drive is great, isn't it? Collaborating with scripts and things and seeing
yeah,
it
amazing.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's something that's kind of been going through my mind in terms of like, since Francois and Simon were co-directing more or less, so, and you're not in the same space, so how do you coordinate that and in line with getting the right notes to Bob or the other editors that you're working with, and figuring that space in this, at this point in time that is COVID?
Francois, you can take that one.
Okay, I'll take that one. Let's just say that the notes were not just from me and Simon. So I think one of the I guess I imagine a difficulty that will probably increase as a result of long distance editing is the way and possibly the amount of feedback that's given by different involved parties. Because I think not being at hand for viewing, you can just type up pages and pages of notes on email and send them on. It's a very different experience. So I think Simon and Bob probably bore the brunt of this more than Bob and I did. But at some point we were getting feedback notes from I think 3 or 4 different sources at the same time, and then it would be like 5 different pages from each source, and they were often conflicting and didn't align, and I mean that did make it pretty hard. I mean, as a rule, when Simon and I work together, we try to not, I mean, Bob, you can maybe also say whether it's worked or not, but what we tried to do was to provide a unified sort of view where we could. So before we communicate with Bob or with funders, we would agree between ourselves first. So, I mean, look, we were in the same place often. I mean, we lived quite close to each other in Cape Town. We spoke a lot on the phone. And I suppose we had a kind of understanding of the film and all the different dimensions. So yeah, so I mean, I guess from our side at least, we tried to send one batch of notes every time rather than 2. So I hope that was successful to some degree. But just to say, I mean, that is something I think that I think it's both in the nature of international co-production, but I think particularly long distance editing is that the process of editorial feedback, I think, is probably something one should try to manage, because it does lend itself to becoming really kind of complex and copious.
Because at that point of the film, Francois was back in South Africa and Simon was with me in Ireland. So you were trying to collaborate and put all the notes together and make them succinct for us to follow, right? Mm-hmm. So hence the and I think you were probably getting a little frustrated not being in the edit, and I think that must have been quite hard, because then we'd action the notes, Simon and I, and then they'd come back and someone else would watch and have more notes, and there was quite a lot of notes over a period of about 2 weeks, I think, wasn't there?
Yeah, we did have 5 separate inputs in the last 2 weeks of the edit. And that was, for me, just almost mind-numbing. And but I thought what was interesting about it was, in you guys talking about the beauty of remote editing, I just don't think it would have worked in that space, because you needed someone. Like, I was sitting next to Bob and we were going, is this a good idea? No, this is a bad idea. Move on. Is this a good idea? Yeah, maybe we can do something here. Tick. This is a bad idea. This is a bad idea.
There was
this
a lot of that.
Idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that would, you're right, that would have been much harder to do.
Exactly. And so, or can we try this really quickly now, see if this works? No, this doesn't work. Let's move on to the next thing. So that's how we were just constantly trying to close down all of these multitude of different suggestions to finish off film.
Yeah. So
Can
how's feedback?
Guys,
yeah.
I mean, there are 2 directors, and you said that you were never together at any particular time, like all 3 of you. How did you work? What was your workflow If one of you was at the editor and the other was not there, how did you balance out making sure that you guys were making the film that you both wanted to make?
Well, we did overlap a bit. I think, I mean, Bob, I think he worked for 7 weeks, 8 weeks, was it?
I was at 8, nearly 9 in the end, but yeah, 8.5 or something. Yeah.
I guess I think of those, Bob worked alone for 2 probably. Simon and I overlapped, I think, for 2 of those, and then the rest was either one or the other of us. But I think again it depends entirely on the kind of film that one is making. I mean, I think Simon, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but our sort of understanding on this film was, I mean, we both quite sort of how I want to put it, we both are quite sort of strong-willed directors with our own films, and I think the idea was with a film like this, it was a film that was in some ways more conventional. It was a film that was made for a streamer market. It was interview-based, interview and archive-based for large parts. I think, and we had an understanding that we would do what works best for, I mean, I guess what you could say is a fairly broad audience. So I think that kind of, there was always sort of, we could always have a recourse to kind of what would work best for the kind of audience we had in mind, which made it easier. I mean, again, if it had been a kind of a more call it experimental, explorative film, I think that process would have been a lot more difficult. But I think we had a kind of a shared understanding of what the film should be. So I think that helped making decisions a lot.
Prior to us, sorry, go ahead, Sam.
No, I wanted to go to this. I have a question that kind of like bundles two things, particularly for Rumbi and Ronet, and also for Simon, Francois, and Bob. It's both of the teams you faced, like you had a deadline, I assume, to meet for your edit, just kind of like, because like Bob said, you only had 8 weeks with him or something, and Rumbi, I think at some point you said 6 weeks to get to the final product. So how does that deadline affect the final outcome? And did you feel like in your case that perhaps you had more time, you had more time, the film would have been different? Or do you feel like perhaps if you'd had more time physically together, so the film would have been different? The same, I don't know. How were you guys handling your deadlines?
Well, I'll just start quickly by saying the 8 weeks that I did was pre the edit had gone through many weeks of remote editing where Simon and Francois did not attend an edit at all, and I think that the collaboration was required to get it to the end and meet the deadline. So that's certainly the experience, the feeling I've got with Girl Taken anyway.
That says a lot about working together.
I think it was important, wasn't it? I mean, I think in the end, Simon and Francois working together, I think the remote editing didn't quite work out as you guys wanted it. I would have hoped, rather.
What about Rumbi?
We've gone very quiet.
I mean, obviously, like I said at the beginning, we would have wanted to be together and we have had more time. And I go back to what Bob, you guys were talking, and Simon was talking about in terms of feedback loops. So we had these milestones throughout the process where Ronet and I would agree, okay, after week 3, we'll send in a cut. After week 5, we'll send in a cut. And then it was getting shorter and shorter and shorter. And, we also needed just to take mental wellness breaks. I think I know Ronet's dog pretty well now. And for spending time outside of the room, even though we're not physically together, just getting a sense of what's happening outside of those spaces as well. So it was really hectic, and I love what Simon says in terms of mind numbing. It was, and particularly in the last 2 weeks of the edit. But I'm really glad that we pulled it through and we completed it.
I mean, from our case, in our case, it was a little bit easier in that we did have, or at least we fought hard for a little bit of flexibility at the end as well, because I think what Simon and I had also decided was that we would shoot some of the more purely visual material once we knew what the story was. It had always been planned that there would be a sort of some bits of the visual layer would be added. So we actually had some time, and then we dropped that into Bob's edit, or there'd been some placeholder shots that we did then put in. So that gave a little bit of flexibility at the end, but at the same time, there was a lot of pressure to get done in the time we had.
I just sorry, I just quickly wanted to say and answer your question, Sam. I do think that the film would be different. I do think we would have loved more time. One always does. 6 weeks is way too little. So it would have been different. And I love remote editing. I'm all for remote editing, but there are those moments where you need to be in the room. And I do think that's where, like I said, those moments, that connection really does come through. And at the end of the day, those changes that are made, I would make them while we're watching together and upload to WhatsApp. Just that little chunk. If I was just trimming frames, it's amazing. It's amazing that it could work and we could do it that way. But there's still a lot missing in that last bit. So the film would have been different if we had more time and we were in the room together, for sure.
Yeah. Now, as I think we're about to wrap up, just very quick, like advice that you guys would give to, because we're still in a space where there is quite a bit of remote editing going around, and a lot of people are working within this space and figuring out how to work in this space. So what nuggets might you guys have in your experience, as based on the journeys that you've had with your films? Start with Simon this time.
I'm gonna sort of go against the love of remote editing. I think you should fight for your seat next to your editor. I think they would love to be in their little bubble all day long and doing their own thing, but I will never ever allow that as a director. I seek out, sort of artistic engagement, argument, conversation with the people I work with, and sometimes in an edit for 8 hours nothing happens, and then an hour 9 something beautiful emerges, and it's because you guys have been hanging out together all day talking about stuff, and these are the sort of beautiful moments in cinema, and I don't believe those types of art making moments appear so often in a remote space. I enjoyed working with Bob because I sat in Bob's cave in Ireland and we spent a lot of time talking shit, and I learned to understand how he was working, and I was watching him very carefully, and I felt like I could support him when he was looking for something. So down with remote editing and up with sticking together.
There we go.
Francois, do you agree?
Well, I think again it depends on the kind of film that you're working on. I think there are more generic and less generic films. I think with kind of a more, if you're making a film for a predefined sort of TV slot, it's obviously much easier to kind of then work with an editor who has edited those kind of films and just send the material and discuss. But I think, I personally, unlike Simon, I don't like sitting with an editor for the most part, partly because I feel that I've edited most of my films recently. I've edited my partners, or a lot of my partners' last 2 films as well. And I kind of find I want to get my hands on the keyboard and I can't because it's the editor. So, I think my preferred way of working as a director is to actually sort of see the editor maybe once a day. If I'm working with another editor, let them do their work and then let me come and discuss with them. But usually, I think that kind of relationship at the same time also needs to be based on a kind of understanding. I think it's very, if I was ever to work long distance with an editor again, I think I'd have to be very sure that we'd spend time, that we start off spending time. I think spending at least a couple of weeks together, the beginning, I think is essential, because I mean, yeah, and I think Bob, I'm sure you had the same experience with us, is that you do, as Simon said, you do get to know how the person thinks, you do get to know the ideas on film language. And also I think particularly, I mean, one thing we haven't really spoken about here is that there is a lot of, let's say, kind of disjuncture between the understanding of the world and from different parts of the world. And I think particularly if you're making a film that has political or social importance for you coming from a specific part of the world, those kind of values you bring, or the perspective you bring, is not necessarily going to be shared by an editor from elsewhere, even though in some ways the you know, kind of the storytelling, the rules in some ways the same. And I think it's really, really important to actually just be able to spend time with the person up front. So I mean, I would say I would definitely do it again, but I think it would be important to spend the first part of the edit with the person.
I'll meet you I'll meet you halfway, 50-50. I think absolutely editor should and does need to spend time alone to be able to get your own head around the project and the material and the flow and the narrative, but also the collaboration at the beginning and the end with the director in the edit suite, to me, is very important. So I'm gonna meet you halfway, guys.
Rumbi, what do you think?
I mean, I agree with Bob. For me, it's half and half as well. And a lot of the content that I've been making in the last couple of years for broadcasters, the short content, it's all been remote. But for a longer film, I definitely love spending time with the editor beforehand, really talking through the content, talking through everything, and then getting in and out of the edit suite. So yeah, I like a mix of both.
Ronet?
Yeah, my mix would be 80%, 20%, not half. And I think the big thing for me is when you speak about the connection and being there. For me, what makes being physically there and being like this there, what do you miss? Why do you have to have a physical person there to understand how they work and how to tell stories? I spent so much time with Rumbi. I've never met her, but we got through it because we connected all the time. I think she was tired of me and I asked her that a few times. So do a person have to be right next to you to kind of solve those things? And I do get there are moments, but 20%, not half. So yeah, I think that's the way to go. That's the way it's gonna go.
We will soon find out, very, very soon. In the coming months, in the coming years. I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much, Rumbi, Ronet, Simon, Francois, Bob. Thank you to the Encounters Film Festival to just, you know, hosting this and sharing this amazing nuggets. And, you know, thanks guys for sharing your experiences, because I think I've learned a bit, because I always find it very interesting. The coolest thing about editing with someone who's somewhere else is they get used to this same spot where you sit and where you look. And I think if you ever see them physically, it looks, you're like, wait, you actually moved to other places. So I hope we get to meet physically someday in a 100%, no 50-50, no 80-50. And wishing you guys a lovely weekend. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Sam.
Thanks, Sam.
Thank you.